The grand reception hall of the celestial spire shimmered under the soft glow of bioluminescent chandeliers suspended from vaulted ceilings carved from living crystal. Pillars of polished obsidian rose like ancient sentinels, their surfaces etched with constellations that shifted subtly with the palace's mood. At the center of it all stood Princess Vera of the Verdant Dominion, tall, regal, and undeniably alien. Her skin shimmered with the deep, iridescent green of jungle canopies after rain, and her long, silken hair flowed like spun moonlight, white as the heart of a dying star. She wore a gown woven from living vines that bloomed with tiny silver flowers at her slightest emotion, and around her neck hung the heartstone of Zintra, a relic said to pulse in time with her soul. Across from her, standing awkwardly in borrowed formalwear 2 sizes too tight, was Joran, a human salvage pilot from the Outer Rim colony of Braxis 7, currently the most bewildered man in 3 star systems. He hadn't meant to laugh. Not really. It had slipped out, a startled, breathless chuckle. When she tilted her head, those large, luminous violet eyes wide with something between hope and heartbreak, and asked, voice trembling like wind through glass reeds, "Am I too ugly for you, human?" The words had hung in the perfumed air like a misfired plasma bolt, and Joran, who had once bartered a rusted fusion coil for a month's worth of oxygen and talked his way out of a black market bounty on 3 separate occasions, had done the one thing he absolutely shouldn't have. He'd laughed. Not cruelly, never that, but with the kind of bewildered, overwhelmed humor that comes when reality tilts too far off its axis. One moment he'd been elbow-deep in the guts of a derelict freighter, pulling salvage from a ship graveyard orbiting a dead moon, and the next he was being beamed aboard a royal cruiser by a squad of armored verdant guards who spoke in melodic clicks and insisted the princess had chosen him. Chosen him for what they wouldn't say. Now, standing in a palace that defied physics and good sense, facing a woman who looked like a dream sculpted from emerald and stardust, he'd been asked if she was ugly. To him, Vera's expression had shuddered instantly. The silver flowers on her gown dimmed to gray. Around them, the courtiers, tall, elegant verdant nobles with skin in shades of jade, moss, and jadeite, froze. A low murmur rippled through the hall, sharp as shattered glass. One of the royal guards shifted his weight, his hand hovering near the energy blade at his hip. Joran's stomach dropped. He knew that look. It was the same look he'd seen on Loan Shark's back on Braxis 7 right before they broke someone's kneecaps. No, that's not," Joran stammered, holding up his hands. "Princess, you're stunning. Absolutely. I didn't expect. I mean, you're asking me if you're ugly? You look like something out of a myth, or a really expensive painting." Vera blinked slowly, her long lashes casting delicate shadows on her cheeks. "Then why did you laugh?" "Because it's absurd," he blurted, then winced. "Not you. The question. You're standing here, glowing basically, and asking if you're ugly to a guy who once wore the same socks for 17 days because his laundry bot exploded. It's like a sun asking if it's too dim to light a candle." A few of the nobles exchanged glances. One stifled what might have been a snort. Vera's lips twitched, just slightly, but her eyes remained wary. "You speak strangely, human." "I've been told," Joran said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I don't know why I'm here. Your guard scooped me up like I was space junk and dropped me in your palace like I belonged. I fix ships. I don't court alien royalty." "You were chosen," Vera said softly, stepping closer. The air around her smelled faintly of petrichor and ozone. "The Heartstone reacted to your biosignature during the last solar convergence. It hasn't pulsed for a suitor in over 300 cycles." Joran stared at the glowing gem at her throat. It was indeed pulsing slow, steady, like a heartbeat. "Wait, you think I'm your mate?" "In verdant tradition, yes," she said, though her voice held less certainty now. "But perhaps the Heartstone malfunctioned. Humans are unpredictable." "And you laughed." "I laughed because I was nervous," Joran insisted. "You're a princess. I live in a ship that smells like burnt wiring and regret. And he gestured helplessly at her. "You're green, and your hair is white, and your eyes look like they've seen the birth of galaxies. You're not ugly. You're terrifyingly beautiful. It's just overwhelming." Vera studied him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she smiled. A small, tentative thing that made the silver flowers on her gown bloom bright again. "Terrifyingly beautiful," she repeated, as if tasting the words. "I like that." Before Joran could respond, a sharp alarm blared through the palace. A deep, resonant tone that vibrated in the bones. The bioluminescent lights flickered red. The courtiers gasped and scattered like startled birds. Vera's expression hardened, her regal mask snapping back into place. "Intruders," she said, her voice now sharp as a vibroblade. From the eastern archway, armored figures stormed in, sleek, black exosuits with crimson sigils, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. Joran recognized the insignia instantly. The Obsidian Claw, a mercenary syndicate known for raiding high-value targets across the quadrant. They moved with lethal precision, energy rifles raised, cutting down palace guards with ruthless efficiency. "Get behind me!" Joran shouted, shoving Vera toward a pillar even as he scanned the room for anything useful. His eyes landed on a ceremonial staff leaning against a display case, polished wood tipped with a crystalline node. Not ideal, but better than nothing. Vera didn't move. Instead, she raised her hands, and the vines of her gown writhed to life, coiling around her arms like living armor. "They seek the Heartstone," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "It holds the genetic key to the Verdant Dominion's terraforming network. With it, they could turn entire worlds into wastelands or paradises depending on their whim." "Great," Joran muttered, hefting the staff. "So they're not just here for tea and biscuits." One of the mercenaries spotted them and fired. Joran yanked Vera down just as a plasma bolt seared the air where her head had been. He rolled, came up swinging, and cracked the staff against the mercenary's visor. The visor cracked, and the man staggered back with a grunt. Joran didn't wait. He bolted toward a side corridor, grabbing Vera's wrist. "Run!" They sprinted through winding halls of living stone, the palace groaning around them as explosions rocked its foundations. Alarms wailed. Smoke curled from shattered conduits. Behind them, the mercenaries gave chase, their heavy footfalls echoing like war drums. "How do you know how to fight?" Vera panted as they ducked into a greenhouse filled with towering, bioluminescent flora. "Salvage work isn't always peaceful," Joran shot back, scanning for an exit. "Sometimes you gotta convince pirates that your cargo isn't worth the trouble." Vera stopped suddenly, placing a hand on a massive, pulsating flower. "There's a transport pod in the root chamber. It can take us to the lower spire where the royal armory is." "Lead the way," Joran said, gripping the staff tighter. They plunged deeper into the palace's organic labyrinth, the air growing thick with the scent of damp earth and alien pollen. The mercenaries were relentless, their weapons tearing through walls and foliage alike. At one point, Joran shoved Vera behind a stone bench and took a plasma bolt to the shoulder. He cried out, stumbling, but kept moving, teeth gritted against the searing pain. "You're bleeding," Vera said, her voice tight with concern. "Yeah, well, it's not my first time," he grunted. "Won't be my last." She touched his wound, and a soft green light emanated from her fingertips. The pain dulled instantly, the edges of the burn beginning to knit together. "Verdant healing," she explained. "It won't close it fully, but it should help." Joran stared at her. "You can do that?" "I am a princess, not just a pretty face," she said, a hint of her earlier vulnerability returning. "Though I suppose you already knew that." He gave a weak chuckle. "Yeah, terrifyingly beautiful and terrifyingly useful." They reached the root chamber, a vast, cavernous space where the palace's living roots twisted into arches and platforms. In the center sat a sleek, seed-shaped pod, its surface shimmering with faint energy. But between them and the pod stood 3 mercenaries, weapons trained. "No more running," Vera whispered. "No more running," Joran agreed. What followed was chaos. Vera unleashed her vines, lashing out like whips, and snaring one mercenary and slamming him into a root wall. Joran charged the second, using the staff to deflect a plasma shot before driving the butt end into the man's gut. The third fired wildly, forcing them both to dive for cover. It was then that Joran noticed something. The heartstone around Vera's neck was glowing brighter, pulsing in time with the palace itself. The roots beneath their feet trembled. The air hummed with latent energy. "The palace is alive," he realized aloud. "And it's listening to you." Vera's eyes widened. "The heartstone doesn't just choose a mate. It bonds with the palace's consciousness. If I focus..." She closed her eyes, and the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a roar like a waking leviathan, the roots surged upward, coiling around the remaining mercenary and crushing his weapon. Vines shot from the walls, binding the others. The pod's hatch hissed open. "Now!" Vera cried, They scrambled inside just as more mercenaries poured into the chamber. The pod sealed shut and shot downward through a vertical shaft lined with glowing veins, accelerating so fast Joran's stomach lurched. When they finally stopped, they were in a dimly lit armory stocked with verdant weaponry. Elegant, organic-looking rifles, energy blades that hummed like wind chimes, and suits of armor that seemed to grow around the wearer. Joran picked up a rifle, testing its weight. Okay, new plan. We fight back. Vera donned a suit of armor that bloomed around her like a flower unfurling. The obsidian claw won't stop until they have the Heartstone, and they've likely disabled the palace's main defenses. Then we'll have to be the defense, Joran said, meeting her gaze. You've got the power. I've got the stubbornness. She smiled again, this time with more confidence. Terrifyingly stubborn? Something like that. As they prepared to move out, Vera hesitated. Joran, before all this, when I asked if I was ugly, did you really mean what you said? He looked at her, really looked, at the way her green skin caught the dim light, at the silver strands of her hair, at the fierce intelligence in her violet eyes, at the woman who could command a living palace and heal wounds with a touch, yet still feared rejection. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, he said quietly, alien or not. She nodded, as if storing those words away for later. Then she raised her weapon. Then let's show them what beauty can do. They moved through the lower levels like shadows, striking with precision. Joran's human unpredictability and street-smart tactics complemented Vera's innate connection to the palace and her royal training. They disabled sabotage teams, reactivated defense nodes, and turned the palace's own biology against the invaders. At one point, Joran rigged a plasma conduit to overload, creating a diversion that allowed Vera to trap a squad in a chamber that sealed itself with thorned vines. But the leader of the Obsidian Claw remained elusive, a towering figure in a reinforced command suit, his voice distorted by a modulator. He broadcast threats over the palace comms, promising to raise the spire to its foundations if the Heartstone wasn't surrendered. He's bluffing, Joran said as they crouched in a maintenance tunnel. He wants the stone intact. He won't destroy the palace if he thinks it's still inside. But he will destroy us, Vera replied, her voice low. And if he captures me, he'll extract the Heartstone surgically. Joran's blood ran cold. Not happening. They formulated a risky plan. Lure the commander into the central atrium, where the palace's core consciousness resided. If Vera could merge fully with the Heartstone and the core, she might be able to expel the invaders through the palace's own systems, but it would leave her vulnerable, exposed. It's too dangerous, Joran argued. It's the only way, she insisted. You'll have to protect me while I connect. He wanted to refuse, to find another way, but he saw the resolve in her eyes, the weight of her duty. So he nodded. Then I'll be your shield. The atrium was a cathedral of light and life, a vast, open space where the palace's core pulsed like a massive, beating heart suspended in midair. Bioluminescent tendrils snaked from the walls, feeding it energy. As Vera stepped forward, the Heartstone flared, and the core responded, tendrils reaching toward her like welcoming arms. Joran stood guard at the entrance, rifle ready. Within minutes, the commander appeared, flanked by his elite guard. He removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face and cold, calculating eyes. The human, he sneered. You think you can stop me? I don't have to stop you, Joran said, shifting his stance. I just have to slow you down. The fight was brutal. Joran used every trick he'd learned in back-alley brawls and shipyard skirmishes, dodging, weaving, using the environment to his advantage. He took hits, bled, kept moving. Behind him, Vera began to glow, her body lifting slightly off the ground as the Heartstone and the core merged. The palace trembled. Light flared. The commander roared in frustration and charged. Joran met him head-on, rifle butt against armored fist. They crashed to the floor, grappling. The commander was stronger, but Joran was faster, angrier, desperate. He drove his knee into the man's gut, then slammed his forehead into his nose. Blood sprayed, but the commander laughed. A wet, gurgling sound. You're nothing, he spat. A stray dog playing hero. Maybe, Joran gasped, wiping blood from his lip, but even stray dogs bite. With a final surge of strength, he triggered the rifle's overload sequence and shoved it into the commander's chest. The explosion threw them both back. Joran hit the floor hard, ears ringing, vision swimming. Through the smoke, he saw Vera, now radiant, surrounded by swirling light, her hair floating as if underwater. The palace roared to life. Roots burst through the floor, vines snaked from the ceiling, and the very air crackled with energy. The remaining mercenaries screamed as they were dragged into the walls, absorbed by the living structure. The commander tried to crawl away, but a tendril wrapped around his ankle and yanked him backward. His final scream was cut short as the palace sealed over him like a wound healing. Silence fell. Joran pushed himself up, wincing. Every part of him ached. But he forced himself to stand, to walk toward Vera as the light around her dimmed. She floated gently back to the ground. The heartstone now fused with the core, its glow steady and strong. "You did it," he said, voice rough. "We did it," she corrected, stepping toward him. Her eyes searched his face, lingering on the cuts and bruises. "You're hurt. Worth it," he said with a tired grin. She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek. This time, the healing light was stronger, warmer. The pain faded, replaced by a strange, comforting hum. For a long moment, they just stood there, surrounded by the quiet pulse of the living palace. Then Vera spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You never answered my question properly." Joran frowned. "Which one? Am I too ugly for you, human?" He looked at her. At the green skin, the white hair, the violet eyes that held galaxies, and shook his head. "Princess, if you were any more beautiful, I'd have passed out the moment I saw you." She laughed then. A real laugh, bright and clear, like wind chimes in a summer storm. And in that moment, with the palace whole again and the stars watching silently from above, Joran realized he wasn't just a salvage pilot anymore. He was something else, something new, something worth laughing about. Not in disbelief, but in wonder. In the days that followed the Obsidian Claw's failed assault, the celestial spire settled into a fragile calm. But peace, Joran quickly learned, was never simple in royal courts. Though the invaders had been purged and the Heartstone secured, whispers slithered through the palace corridors like unseen predators. Not all verdant nobles approved of their princess's sudden attachment to a human, especially one who smelled faintly of engine grease and carried scars like souvenirs from forgotten battles. Counselor Thalos, a stern elder with skin the color of dried moss and eyes like polished flint, led the dissent. He argued before the royal conclave that Vera's bond with the Heartstone had been compromised by foreign biology, and that Joran's presence risked destabilizing the Dominion's ancient genetic harmony. Vera dismissed the claims publicly, her voice steady and regal, but in private, doubt flickered in her eyes. She began spending long hours in the ancestral archives, poring over scrolls written in luminous script that only verdant royalty could read. Joran noticed the change, the way she'd pause mid-sentence, the way her vines no longer bloomed silver when he entered a room. He tried to bridge the distance with jokes and stories from Braxis 7, but his humor now seemed to land like stones in still water. Then came the summons from the High Oracle of Zintra, a being so ancient it existed more as memory than flesh, housed in a crystalline sanctum deep beneath the spire. The oracle demanded Vera appear alone for a soul resonance test, a ritual to confirm the purity of her bond with the Heartstone. Joran wasn't allowed to accompany her, but he waited outside the sanctum for hours, pacing like a caged beast, until Vera finally emerged, pale and silent, her white hair dull as ash. "What did they say?" he asked gently. She wouldn't meet his eyes. "They say the Heartstone's pulse is erratic, that it reacts not just to me, but to you, and that such a bond is unnatural." "Unnatural?" Joran scoffed, though his chest tightened. "Since when did love need permission from a rock and a ghost?" "It's not just a rock," she whispered. "It's the soul of our world, and if it's confused, the terraforming fields could collapse. Entire ecosystems might wither." The weight of her words settled between them like a wall. That night, Joran packed his few belongings, mostly spare parts and a dented flask of synth whiskey, and left a note on his bedside vine table. "If my being here hurts your world more than it helps your heart, I'll go." He didn't wait for sunrise. He slipped through the service tunnels, heading for the hangar where his salvaged freighter, the Rustwing, had been impounded but not yet dismantled. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. As he neared the hangar bay, alarms blared. Not the palace's melodic chimes, but the harsh staccato shriek of external breach. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in blood-like hues. Through a viewport, Joran saw it. A massive warship, its hull scarred with the sigil of the Iron Concord. A human-led coalition long at war with the Verdant Dominion, hovering in low orbit, launching drop pods like metallic seeds. The Concord hadn't come for the Heartstone. They'd come for him, because buried in Joran's past, buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it himself, was a truth he'd never told Vera. Before he was a salvage pilot, he'd been a test subject in Project Chimera, a Black Ops program that spliced human DNA with alien biosequences to create adaptive soldiers. The project was shut down after a catastrophic breach, its records erased. But the Concord had uncovered fragments, and they believed Joran's hybrid genome held the key to weaponizing verdant terraforming tech. Worse, they knew the Heartstone responded to him because his blood carried dormant verdant markers, remnants of early Chimera experiments using stolen Dominion tissue samples. Now, they wanted to extract him, or dissect him. Joran ducked into a maintenance alcove as armored Concord soldiers stormed the corridor, their powered exosuits clanking, voice modulators barking orders. He activated his wrist comm, salvaged, jury-rigged, and still functional, and sent a single encrypted burst to Vera's private channel. "They're here for me. Don't trust the Oracle. It's a trap." He didn't know if she'd receive it. He didn't have time to find out. Back in the palace's upper chambers, Vera stared at the message, her heart hammering against her ribs. The Oracle's words echoed in her mind, but so did Joran's laugh, the way he'd stood between her and plasma fire, the quiet strength in his hands when he'd held hers after the battle. She'd been so consumed by duty, by fear of the unknown, that she'd forgotten the most verdant truth of all. Life thrives not in purity, but in connection. She tore off her ceremonial circlet and ran. By the time she reached the hangar level, chaos reigned. Concord soldiers clashed with verdant guards, energy bolts scorching the walls. In the center of it all, Joran was cornered near the rust wing, bleeding from a gash on his temple, swinging a severed power conduit like a club. Vera didn't hesitate. She raised her hands and the palace answered. Roots erupted through the floor, entangling soldiers. Vines lashed from the ceiling, disarming attackers. The hangar doors sealed shut with a thunderous boom, trapping friend and foe alike. "Vera," Joran started, but she cut him off. "Tell me everything," she demanded, stepping between him and the nearest soldier, her eyes blazing. Between gasps he did about Project Chimera, the stolen verdant cells, the reason the Heartstone had chosen him not as a suitor, but as a mirror. A living echo of what the Dominion once shared with other species before they sealed themselves away in genetic isolation. Vera listened, her expression shifting from shock to sorrow to something fiercer. Resolve. "You're not a mistake," she said finally. "You're a reminder. We forgot how to reach beyond ourselves. The Heartstone didn't choose you despite your humanity. It chose you because of it." She turned to the captured Concord commander, a grizzled veteran with a cybernetic eye. "You came for a weapon," she said, her voice ringing with royal authority. "But you found something far more dangerous, truth." Before the commander could respond, the palace shuddered violently, not from attack but from within. Deep in the core, the Heartstone pulsed erratically, its light flickering between green and a sickly gray. The Oracle's sanctum had been sabotaged, its ancient systems tampered with to destabilize the stone's resonance. The Los, it turned out, had conspired with the Concord, believing that by triggering a crisis, he could force Vera to sever her bond with Joran and restore purity. But the plan had backfired. The Heartstone, caught between two souls it recognized as one, was tearing itself apart, and with it the Dominion's life support systems. "We have to merge with it," Vera said, grabbing Joran's hand. "Together. It'll kill us," he argued. "Human biology can't handle that kind of energy." "Then we die together," she said simply. "Or we live as something new." There was no time for debate. They raced to the core chamber, Concord soldiers and verdant loyalists forgotten in the face of planetary collapse. As they entered, the air crackled with unstable energy. The Heartstone floated at the center, fractured, its light dimming. Vera placed her palm on the core. Joran placed his over hers, and the world exploded not in fire, but in light. Their minds fused in a storm of memory and sensation. Vera felt the grit of Braxis 7's dust storms, the ache of loneliness in deep space, the warmth of a shared flask on a cold moon. Joran felt the whisper of ancient forests, the song of twin suns rising over emerald oceans, the weight of centuries carried in a single heartbeat. The Heartstone stabilized not by rejecting one, but by weaving them together. Green and human, alien and earthborn, fear and courage, doubt and devotion. The palace bloomed anew, its roots spreading deeper, its light brighter than ever. When they opened their eyes, they were changed. Vera's skin now held faint golden undertones where Joran had touched her. Joran's eyes shimmered with violet flecks, and his blood, when he nicked his hand on a shard of crystal, glowed softly green. The verdant dominion would never be the same, nor would humanity. But as they stood hand in hand in the reborn heart of the spire, watching the Concord warship retreat in confusion and the Los kneel in stunned silence, Joran turned to Vera and grinned, blood and light mingling on his lips. "So," he said, "still think you're too ugly for me?" She laughed, the same bright, clear laugh as before, but now it carried the echo of two worlds. "Only if you still think I'm terrifyingly beautiful." "More every second," he said, and somewhere, deep in the stars, the universe sighed in approval. In the wake of the Heartstone's transformation, the verdant dominion entered an era unlike any in its long, cloistered history. The fusion of Joran's human spirit with Vera's verdant essence did not weaken their world. It awakened it. The terraforming fields, once rigid and precise, began to adapt with unprecedented creativity, blooming with hybrid flora that shimmered in hues no verdant botanist had ever recorded. Crimson petals edged in gold, trees whose leaves hummed in harmony with passing comets, rivers that flowed with water tasting faintly of starlight and rain. The palace itself grew new chambers, warm, sun-drenched spaces filled with human comforts like soft couches, mismatched mugs, and a perpetually humming coffee machine Joran had jury-rigged from salvaged parts and verdant biocircuitry. The political fallout was swift but surprisingly gentle. Councillor the Los, once the staunchest opponent of their union, knelt before Vera not in surrender, but in awe. "We feared contamination," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But you have given us evolution." He became one of their most ardent allies, spearheading a new initiative. The Concord of Shared Skies, a fragile but growing alliance between the Dominion and select human colonies built on transparency, mutual aid, and the quiet understanding that survival in the cosmos required more than purity. It demanded connection. Joran, for his part, never returned to salvage work. Not because he couldn't, but because he'd found something far more valuable than scrap metal. With Vera's blessing, he founded the first Bridge Academy, a school nestled in the palace's newly grown eastern wing, where verdant children and human exchange students learned side by side. He taught them engineering, yes, but also storytelling, improvisation, and the fine art of fixing things with duct tape and hope. The children adored him, especially when he let them ride on his shoulders through the vine-laced courtyards or told exaggerated tales of his glorious days as a space junk collector. And through it all, their love deepened. Not in grand declarations, but in quiet moments. In the way Vera would braid tiny silver flowers into Joran's hair after a long day. In how Joran would hum old earth lullabies while Vera meditated, her vines curling gently around his wrist like living bracelets. They argued sometimes, about protocol, about whether hoverbikes were elegant. Vera said no. Joran insisted they were practically poetry with wheels. But they always made up laughing, tangled in sheets woven from moon silk and stubbornness. When the time came for their wedding, the entire Dominion prepared. Not in the ancient, solemn rites of old, but in a ceremony of their own making, a blending of worlds. It was held not in the grand reception hall, but in the heart of the reborn core chamber, where the Heartstone now pulsed with a steady, golden-green light. Vera wore a gown of living jasmine and stardust, her white hair crowned with blossoms that bloomed only in the presence of true joy. Joran, clean-shaven and wearing a suit tailored from verdant silk that somehow didn't itch, stood beside her with hands that no longer shook. Not from fear, but from fullness. There were no vows recited from scrolls. Instead, they spoke from the heart, in front of family, friends, former enemies, and even a few bewildered but respectful Concord diplomats. "I once thought love had to fit inside the lines," Vera said, her voice clear and strong. "But you taught me that the most beautiful things grow wild. And I thought I was just passing through," Joran replied, squeezing her hand. "Turns out, I was coming home." As they clasped hands over the Heartstone, it flared, not with power, but with warmth, and a single beam of light shot upward, piercing the palace ceiling and streaking into the sky. Across the Dominion, people looked up to see a new constellation forming. Two figures, side by side, one green and luminous, the other human and bright, forever entwined among the stars. After the ceremony, there was music. Verdant harpstrands played alongside a slightly off-key human guitar, and dancing on floors that bloomed with light beneath every step. Joran spun Vera until her laughter echoed off the crystal walls, and she, in turn, pulled him into a slow, swaying embrace as the twin moons rose over the spire. Later, as the guests drifted away and the palace settled into a contented hum, they stood together on the highest balcony, watching the nebula swirl in the distance like a painter's dream. "You know," Joran said, wrapping an arm around her waist, "I still can't believe this is real." Vera leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "It's real because we made it so." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of rain and starlight that always clung to her. "So, what's next, Your Highness?" She smiled, her violet eyes glinting with mischief and love. "How about we start that family you keep hinting at? Though I warn you, our children will probably have white hair, green skin, and an unnatural talent for rewiring plasma conduits before they can walk." Joran laughed, the sound rich and easy, full of a happiness he'd never known he deserved. "Perfect. I'll teach them how to laugh when they're scared, and you'll teach them how to heal with their hands. And together," she said softly, "we'll teach them that beauty isn't about how you look, but who you choose to stand beside when the universe tries to tear you apart." Below them, the palace glowed, alive and whole. Above, the stars burned with quiet promise. And in that moment, wrapped in each other's arms, Joran and Vera knew, no matter what came next, they would face it not as alien and human, princess and pilot, but as partners, as equals, as home. And that, more than any throne or relic or cosmic miracle, was the happiest ending of all. Years later, their children, green-skinned with white curls and eyes that shimmered violet and gold, played among the palace vines, laughing in a language that blended human slang with verdant song. Joran, now gray at the temples but still quick with a joke, taught them how to fix engines with love and a little luck. Vera ruled with wisdom and warmth, her heart never far from the man who'd once laughed not out of mockery, but wonder. Their love became legend, not for its grandeur, but for its stubborn, joyful humanity. The heartstone pulsed gently in the core, no longer a relic of the past, but a beacon of unity. Enemies became allies, worlds reached across the void, and the Dominion flourished in its newfound openness. On quiet evenings, they still walked the same balcony, hand in hand, watching the twin moons rise. "Still terrifyingly beautiful," he'd whisper. "Still terrifyingly mine," she'd reply. And the stars, as always, smiled down in silent blessing.